We are here to talk about Robert Carter talking about the fact that there are essentially no humans from parts of the Earth that are generally, by creationists, considered to be rocks deposited by Noah's flood.
This is one of my favorite go-to arguments that's just a really easy, quick, simple way to just crumble the entire flood model. It's just asking, hey, where are all the human fossils?
Right.
And then based on the reactions and the responses that I personally have gotten when I have asked creationists this question, this kind of just seems like a very easy kryptonite for their model. They're even the most well-educated and informed creationist, as ironic of a term as that is, they still do not have a good, logical, viable answer to this easy question to ask them. It's just like, ask them one question and see all the steam leave, all the wind exit out of their sails, you know?
Right.
This is one of my favorites
fair.
because the entire purpose of the flood was to kill all of humanity except for Noah's family. So it's a murder mystery. And we don't have a single body. Like, that's the one thing that the flood was supposed to do, was create a bunch of human bodies. That's the one thing. It's one job. And we don't have any evidence of it.
So if you're not currently subscribed to Grayson's channel, after this, why don't you go click on that and check it out. And if it's something that you like, go subscribe. All right, so let's hear what Dr. Rob Carter and that guy whose name I'm sure we're going to learn soon have to say about why there are no human fossils. And remember, the reason that this is an issue is because, according to most young Earth creationists, the flood killed the vast majority of all humans on Earth and buried them in the same event that caused almost all fossils, at least all Paleozoic and Mesozoic fossils. And according to ICR, at least, many of the Cenozoic fossils, too. And so the question then is, well, how come we don't have any human fossils from that time period? Like, at all. Anywhere. And it's a darn good question.
I'm Dr. Robert Carter. I'm sitting here with my good friend, Joel Tay.
Yes, thank you.
Joel Tay, there you go.
Really fun
That's his name.
discussion on human fossils, Noah's flood, and questions.
I can say with a name like Joel Tay, really this guy should be into like some kind of music thing, because that's a musician name. That's not a doing a young Earth creationist podcast name.
That we get asked sometimes after our talks, at our events, sometimes online on Facebook. I'm trying to answer some YouTube videos that CMI produces when people jump on us saying, oh, how come we don't see human fossils in the fossil record? Excellent question.
Hey, you know what? I props to Robert Carter. It is an excellent question. And you know what? While I don't think they're going to do a good job of explaining this, I got to say that even recognizing it as a problem is a step in the right direction for creationists, because a lot of creationists like to just pretend that problems largely don't exist, or that they're just so trivially easy. Like, how many times has Donnie said that he's completely solved the heat problem? The heat problem has absolutely been destroyed. And this is like, at no point has he ever even come close. So you know what? At least Robert Carter is acknowledging, no, this is a real problem, and we probably need to come up with answers for it. So
Okay, so just to frame the whole thing, all human fossils that we know today, they are post-flood.
Yeah.
So how do we know that?
Actually, I wrote an article a couple years ago, are Neanderthals pre-flood? Because someone asked me that. They were convinced the Neanderthal fossils were pre-flood and modern humans are post-flood. But it's not true. Neanderthals are buried in shallow graves. They're buried in caves and rock layers that have been formed by Noah's flood.
So the cave bit is interesting because there's a phenomenon called paleo caves. They're not super common, but they do exist. We know that there have been caves on Earth during like the whole of the geological column. And like, how do you explain that? How does a cave form out of mud underwater during a global flood so that it can be later infilled with sediment, which itself can have fossils? And I don't know how to answer that. I don't think there's a good answer for that.
I would also say that it's kind of telling here. Like, let's think about like the question that Rob Carter was asked. He was asked, how do we know that all human fossils are post-flood? And in response to that, he just wants to say, well, how do we know that Neanderthals were post-flood? It's like, well, why don't you are these same arguments that you're about to give, Rob, do they also apply to, let's say, Homo erectus or Homo habilis? Like, I don't think that something tells me that they aren't going to apply to those other species.
They will in a few cases, because we do find some Homo erectus in caves, like famously Peking Man, which was just a Chinese Australopithecus, or sorry, Homo erectus, was found in a cave, not inside a whole bunch of sediment.
Some of them do, but like he's continuing to list out his arguments right here, and the other ones are not going to apply.
God did it. Well, yeah, I mean, there's that too. That is going to be the ultimate answer.
Yeah, but
And-
it's just such a bad answer too, because if God did it and he just did all these miracles, because the flood needs miracles. You have to miracle away all that heat. If God was willing to just do miracles, then he could have just vanished every single sinful person. He didn't have to wipe out the plants or the animals or any of that. None of that was at issue. He could have just vanished away, poofed away all the problems.
we carry Neanderthal genes, therefore, obviously, humans and Neanderthals live together because they had babies together. So
Just
Neanderthals
after
are
flood.
post-flood,
Okay.
as well.
That's the
Actually,
argument I was
the genetic one actually does work pretty well for Neanderthals. I don't think it applies to anything else though, other than Denisovans. Like, but
That's what I'm saying is like there's no Homo erectus hybrids. There's
Yeah.
no evidence for Homo habilis. Like that argument is what I was saying doesn't work for anything that's not a Neanderthal or a Denisovan.
As all the other human fossils. Now, the evolutionists say us because humans didn't evolve until late. And, had billions of years of fossil record, and humans are only on the top.
Okay, so we believe that all human fossils are post-flood, yet as biblical creationists, we believe that the vast majority of fossils that we find are actually
flood
caused
fossils.
by the flood.
it is curious because one of the things that the creationists love to talk about is how perfect for fossilization the flood would have been, and how that's why we get so many fossils from the flood.
Oh, they're gonna talk about that, Dapper. They're
And
gonna
yet-
say the exact thing.
And yet it's like, okay, but what about all these post-flood fossils? Because there's still a lot of those. Like, we don't have this vast reduction in the number of fossils. In
Yeah.
fact, the higher up you go in the geological column, the more likely you are to find more fossils because more of that rock simply still exists because it hasn't been eroded away yet. So it's like their view of how fossilization works and how prominent fossils are is basically the opposite of what actually is real. Like,
It's really amazing, Dapper, that they're literally going to bring up each one of those points. They are going to
Oh,
bring
good.
this up themselves to try to debunk other creationist
Of
explanations
course.
for where the human fossils are. But they're never going to turn those same points against their own beliefs. It's weird how that happens.
well, it happens a lot with creationists is they will bring up really good points to counter some other creationists' ideas with whom they disagree, but then never bother to apply the same level of critical thinking and reasoning to their own ideas. And so it's like you listen to people who are doing like the late versus early flood boundary debate, and they both make excellent points as to why the other side's flood boundary doesn't work. And it's like, yeah, the reason they're both able to do that is because they're both wrong, because there's no such thing as a flood boundary.
Oh, they're gonna talk about that too, Dapper. You're
Oh,
hitting
good.
it's gonna be so funny when they bring up all these points
Okay,
later.
well, here we go.
So that's a good question, and it raises a controversy, and it raises some discussion points that can be answered. And we're going to try to answer them here because we have a lot of points on our outline to go through. All right.
So first of all, why are most of the fossils that we find, why are they caused by the flood?
Noah's flood is a perfect recipe for fossilization.
That
You have
is-
massive amounts of water
gonna
washing
count that
around,
as the
massive
prediction. I'll
amounts
take
of
a drink.
sediments, things piling up quickly, things getting buried in sandy, gravelly sort of matrix away from predators, away from oxygen, away from bacteria, and then the minerals in the pore waters of those soon-to-be rocks start to crystallize, and we have fossils forming.
So we need rapid barrier catastrophe. These are the best conditions
Yeah.
for fossils.
So one thing I do want to point out is that none of that actually explains ichnofossils, which are very, very common. So that's things like burrows, footprints, stuff like that. And the flood actually has no realistic option for ichnofossils. If you want to say like body fossils, like the mechanism described would probably get you body fossils. But how you preserve a footprint on a layer of mud under a flood, on top of which another layer of mud is about to get washed,
Yeah.
it's just not an option.
Well, it's so baffling because like these fossilized footprints there's an order to them. Like
Mhm.
it's like you only get some at the bottom layers, and then you see as you go up layer by layer, the actual types of tracks that are laid down, the footprints that are fossilizing are different. Like it is just so remarkably preclusionary to a global flood.
Yeah.
And like on this point here where they talk about a global flood, that's perfect fossilization conditions. That explains everything that we see. It's like if these people call themselves flood geologists, but yet they don't ever study the geology of actual floods, like
Right.
well-known, universally recognized flood deposits, like deposits from a well-known massive flood. What does that actually look like geologically speaking? And like it doesn't look anything like there's a like a characteristic geological footprint where it's like you're gonna have like thick coarse parallel bedded units, you're horizontally like bedded thinner laminated units, ripple and dune cross beds, silt beds. You're going to have all these hallmark characteristics of actual flood geology that none of these flood geologists know anything about. Like the largest, to my knowledge, the largest example of like a formation, like a geological like layering that's caused by a massive catastrophic flood is in the channeled scablands in the northwest United States.
Well, I would point out that's the largest known one on Earth. Mars has a much bigger floodplain.
True. That's the largest known one on Earth. And I'm like, if you go there and you look at the geology of the scablands, like it
doesn't look like the rest of Earth.
Yeah, exactly. Very clearly from a massive flood. It's characteristic of that. It doesn't look like the rest of the layers that these creationists say are from a flood.
I love the ripple marks that are so big that you can't tell the ripple marks unless you get up into like a helicopter or something.
Yeah.
That's always fun.
There are ways to tell if like layers are being deposited by a truly massive catastrophic flood. Like there are characteristics in the rock that the other rocks on Earth don't have, Rob.
Right.
Yeah. So Noah's flood predicts a massive amount of fossils, and creationists have been saying that for decades.
Okay, so the flood layers form the fossils, and is that a reason why we find 95% of the fossils that we find?
Can you pause it for a second right there, actually? I just want everybody to just remember that quote from Rob for later. He said that the flood model predicts a massive amount of fossils. That's the prediction from the flood. Okay, let's just keep that same energy when we're talking about human fossils later, shall we?
Got it.
Ocean-dwelling creatures.
Actually, more than that, it's mostly clams.
Mostly clams. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think it's mostly clams. I don't know that there's been a survey done. I would agree that shelled organisms are a big thing, but there are multiple places in the fossil record where, like, brachiopods outnumber bivalves. Also, bivalve is probably more accurate than clam, because, there's more bivalves than just clams.
I was gonna have a very generous reading of Rob here and just pretend he said bivalve.
Okay.
But I mean, even then, like, I don't even know if that's true. But, like, sure, I could just grant, like, the majority of fossils are marine fossils. I think that's...
You want to know why? Most sediment ends up in oceans. That's why. That's literally why. In fact, the flood has trouble explaining that, because the flood should be burying all sorts of terrestrial organisms, and the continents are where we find most of our fossils, because it's not very easy to go on a fossil dig at, like, the bottom of, I don't know, the Gulf of Mexico. Like, what do you... Explain to me your plan for the bottom of the ocean fossil dig. Like, you don't have one, exactly. So yeah, like, of course, oceans are where most of the fossils end up, because where most of the sediment ends up.
Oh, Dapper.
Yes.
Dapper, I've heard at Creationists before making the argument that when I asked them where all the missing human fossils are, they literally told me at the bottom of the oceans. We can't find them because they're buried at the bottom of the oceans, and we can't actually dig there.
Oh, of course.
Like, they will come up with any excuse.
Because the flood started in the oceans.
Okay.
And since it's a watery event, the things that lived in the water were the first things to die and get buried in massive numbers.
So this is ecological zonation, and I want to point one cool thing out about ecological zonation. Ecological zonation is this idea that basically the ordering of the fossil record is not a temporal ordering, but rather it's essentially an elevation ordering, right? Where we start with deep sea stuff like the Ediacaran or the Ediacaran. I can't figure out how to say it because I hear people say it both ways.
I always say Ediacaran.
Ediacaran? We'll go with that for now.
It just rolled off the tongue. I like saying it that way. I don't know.
That's fair. Which a lot of our fossils from the Ediacaran are deep marine. And then a lot of our Cambrian fossils are in fact shallow marine. But there's a problem. Stromatolites. Stromatolites happen from... We get fossils of stromatolites from even before our Ediacaran fossils. And they're always shallow water.
Yeah. Because
they're photosynthetic. They can't grow at low depths because they need the sunlight. Which means that right with the very first fossils, because they are our earliest body fossil that we know of, right? The very first fossils completely destroy this entire ecological zonation, and it doesn't work any other time, right? Like, why are whales restricted to the highest layers? Were they in upland whales?
Do they ever think about any of the fact that there are marine deposits in literally every layer, like Cretaceous marine deposits, Cenozoic marine deposits?
That's actually the joke. Savage Cobra's nickname here right now is a joke about this. The bivalve alpinist. It's because of all the bivalves on alpine mountains, right? Like, did the clams run uphill? What's
the
happening?
ecological zonation. I don't know how that one worked.
Right.
That might be a good response back. Do you ever meet creationists that try to bring up the surfing monkeys to you?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and next time I hear about surfing monkeys, I'm bringing up the mountain climbing clams.
Yeah, at least monkeys are physically capable of surfing. I saw it on the news.
Yeah. I mean, we do have examples of creatures like floating on like rafts of debris.
Yeah, in historical times too. Like
It's a known phenomenon.
like iguanas are known to have spread from island to island via rafting in the 20th century. Like not in like the medieval period or something. Like in the 20th century, islands were introduced to green iguanas because they rafted over after a hurricane. Like this is a thing that just happens. All right, here we go.
And only 0.25% of vertebrates. This is a
So
tiny amount.
0.25% of fossils have a backbone.
I think that is far too high of an estimate, but who cares?
A backbone,
Yeah.
that's what it is.
Okay, that's amazing. And some of those are dinosaurs.
Mhm.
Some of those are mosasaurs and fish and pterosaurs. And doesn't look like there's hardly any human fossils buried in the fossil record deeply. Now, I know there are people that say, oh, there's this fossil of a giant person buried in this.
Bad Photoshop. But you know what? I'm pretty sure Robert Carter is about to say this is exactly what that is. So I'm not going to drink for it. It's fine. I'm sure Robert Carter is not this stupid.
Layered. We tend to not go there.
Yes.
Most of our stuff says, looking at the fossil record, there really isn't any evidence of giant humans. We just made some people mad. That's fine. But also, there's no evidence of human fossils deep into the fossil record.
Mhm.
That's just the way it is.
And
Pause
one
it for a
reason-
second right there.
Yeah.
Let's just again keep that in mind that he does said that, because like let's just all keep that in mind, because obviously like I would say almost 50% of the creationists that if you talk about this with a creationist and you ask them where all the missing human fossils is, almost 50% of them are going to give you the conspiracy theories. Like
Yeah.
the amount of times that I've heard of them covering up giant human Nephilim fossils, or the pre-flood human fossils being hidden by the museums and NASA, whoever's doing this, like at least half of CMI's audience thinks these things.
My favorite creationist conspiracy theory about fossils was I actually first heard about this from Cindy Lin.
So 95% are invertebrates
Yep.
in the ocean. 4.75% is actually from plants.
Okay, so I want to point out these are numbers that are actually taken, as far as I can tell. The only place I've been able to trace this down to is a chat, not even an official talk or lecture, but a chat that Dwayne Gish had one day at the ICR offices, where he was spitballing reasonable sounding numbers, and then these were later compiled into like actual numbers that like creationists take seriously for some reason. But as far as I can tell, there has never been a study surveying the total fossils. I mean, for one thing, 95% of the fossil record are marine fossils. I mean, if you include like biogenic limestone, which is basically just composed of fossils from marine organisms, it should be like 99.9% of all fossils. So like I have no idea why they think that this is a point that's important. And also, these numbers are made up.
Yeah.
Just made up.
That is not like a uniquely differentiated line of evidence to support their
Right.
model.
Like no one is contesting that most fossils are marine, and no one is predicting that they shouldn't be.
Yeah, because the flood's over. You don't have this massive episode of sedimentary deposition happening anywhere. And so fossil formation happening today is rare.
Well, I mean, fossil formation is just generally rare, period.
Yeah.
But like we know of places where fossils are forming. One of my favorite things to point out is the existence of what are called subfossils, which are the remains of organisms that are partially permineralized.
Yeah.
And if we have those, which means that they're all fairly recent, right? Because they're all in that sort of 10,000-ish year range. And they're subfossils, which means they're currently undergoing the process of permineralization. That means that we do have fossils forming, and those are some fossils that we interrupted from forming right there. Like, in process. The very fact that a subfossil is a thing that exists is a pretty strong indication that fossilization is going on right now. We know of places where fossils are forming right now.
And you already brought up the excellent point earlier, where if you do put a flood boundary somewhere in the fossil record, like a lot of creationists, sometimes they put it at, the extinction event of the dinosaurs, sometimes they put it at the Cenozoic, wherever they put it. If you've got a flood boundary,
you still have fossils above that boundary at like no greater or lesser rate than below that boundary.
Right.
Like-
Yeah. Everything just continues on as if
Yeah, like-
geology didn't change drastically at that point.
We've got a lot of Pleistocene fossils. I don't know if Rob's just not aware
Oh,
of
yeah.
this.
Actually, around in the area where I live, most of the fossils are various like later Cenozoic, so like Eocene and
here.
whatnot.
But the Bible is clear that God created dinosaurs on day 6, land creatures, together with man.
That's what I was pointing at.
I'm going to take a drink, for the Bible is clear about this.
That's what I was talking about earlier, Dapper, where you were like saying that, you know, they're just taking Bible verses and saying it says stuff. It's like, yeah, the Bible's pretty clear that dinosaurs were created on day 6. It says
Yeah.
that clear.
Actually, it mentioned the only place that the Bible mentions dinosaurs in Genesis 1 is when it talks about the birds of the air being created on day 5.
Yes.
So
Okay, and wait, Rob Carter, like, I like Rob because he will actually correct his co-host on this. That's kind of rare for a creationist to do.
The Bible says he created land animals together with man.
So that would include dinosaurs.
It would include dinosaurs now that we know that dinosaurs exist.
And yet we know that in the fossil
Existed.
record,
except that, okay, this is something that really bugs me about the land animals versus animals of the air and sea. The creationists, like, they seem to think that that has some kind of taxonomic meaning. The thing is, it really doesn't, right? Like, if you say, well, dinosaurs are land animals, I can say, okay, well, what about the ones that aren't? The point that I always try to make with that is, like, even in terms of the text, the distinction of which day something is being made on is not a strictly taxonomic distinction. It is a habitat distinction. Essentially, God is creating habitats and then filling them with the animals that should be in those habitats without any particular regard, as far as I can tell, to any kind of taxonomy. Which means that if you're trying to use the day of creation as a taxonomic argument, you're fundamentally misunderstanding both the Bible and taxonomy. Which, I mean, I feel like you should get one of those right.
dinosaurs and man are not found
Yeah, they're not.
together. Why is that?
Well, except for the birds, but we'll let it go. I'm going to let it go.
Well, how many different reasons can we think of?
Well, quite a
Okay,
few.
wait,
I think
pause.
first of all, we have what we call living fossils, right?
Yeah.
How is this? What?
I just love, like, 0.5 seconds into Rob Carter's answer to that question. Like, he said, very clear question. Why aren't human fossils found with dinosaurs? And Rob's answer was that, let's see how many different answers that we can just think of for that. Let's just spitball how many we can come up with, because we don't know. It's like,
And also, the first answer to this isn't even anything that could logically be a problem for this. Like,
Yeah. living fossils, yeah.
what?
How many seconds do you think it will be before somebody brings up the coelacanth from here?
From here?
Yeah.
Probably not more than 5. I'm going to go under 5.
Yeah, you're probably right.
All right, here we go. Let's find out. We're at 57 seconds right now.
So what are living fossils? These are creatures that we find in the fossil record. And
And they're
for
alive
example-
today.
yeah, they're still alive today. But we
No,
only find them
more.
certain, what we call time frames in using evolutionary time.
Yeah, so horseshoe crabs.
Horseshoe crabs is a good
Yeah, they're
example.
all over the bay where I grew up. I saw horseshoe crabs all the time, and they're in the fossil record in some of the deeper layers of the fossil record. Buried with trilobites. Trilobites are now extinct. But it's something like the coelacanth.
Oh,
Was it
okay,
like?
so that was like 15, 16 seconds, right?
Okay. So one thing I want to point out is that
Trilobites are not living fossils. are they?
trilobites are, yeah, they can't be living fossils because they're extinct. So we're going to take a drink for Rob Carter, apparently thinking that maybe trilobites are still alive, except he doesn't. I don't know. It's very confusing.
But yeah, 15 seconds. Actually, pretty impressive self-restraint there.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to horseshoe crabs, one of the things I want to point out is that horseshoe crabs don't actually stay the same throughout the fossil record. Our earliest
That would be-
Xiphosurin, yeah, well, we're going to talk about that too. So our earliest Xiphosurins have significant differences. Now, they might not be the kind of difference that the average person is going to notice as someone who doesn't study things like arthropod anatomy, but they're actually very significant. So, for instance, there is very obvious and very evident Xiphosurin evolution in the fossil record. It is not simply that horseshoe crabs appear more or less identical to how they are now, and then they persist that way. They do not. We have basal Xiphosurins who are missing many of the aspects of modern Xiphosaura or modern Lemulidae. I can't talk right now. Anyway,
I think that your same basic argument applies to just about every example I've ever seen of a creationist bringing up a living fossil.
Right.
Just, like the coelacanth, you can bring out like anatomical differences between fossil coelacanth and modern day coelacanth. You could do the same thing with pretty much everything I've ever seen a creationist list as an example of.
In fact, the entire genus to which all modern coelacanths belong is Latimeria, and there are no fossil Latimerians, members of Latimeria that we know of. Latimeridae does seem to start off in the Cretaceous, but it starts out with much larger freshwater-only Latimerids, which are still significantly different from our deep water modern coelacanths.
Yes.
That amazing fish that they thought was the primitive four-legged animal. You know, those stumpy legs were the.
No one has ever thought that coelacanths were primitive four-legged animals. I'm just going to take a drink.
I think that deserves it, because I heard that. I'm just like, wait, Rob, what? Like,
In fact,
what are you referring to? Is he just saying that because they're lobe-finned fish that people were trying to say that these were the transitional species or something? Or
I think so. All right, here we go.
Evidence of the thing evolving into a land animal.
Yes.
In the evolutionary record, I mean, it's got a couple 100 million years of fossil representation.
Yeah.
And then it died out.
Yeah, almost all of which is Mesozoic, Rob.
Yeah.
Mesozoic. When do you think science says the transition between tetrapods and their aquatic ancestors occurred? Because I'll give you a hint. It wasn't the goddamn Mesozoic, Rob. I'm just saying, take another drink there, because, like, he has to know better, right? Like, you can't tell me Robert Carter doesn't know that the vast majority of coelacanth fossil diversity is Mesozoic.
Like, he's saying, well, where's the transitional fossil between the coelacanth and land animals? It's like, why do you think there should be one, Rob?
Right, yeah, like, there are transitional fossils between basostegocephalian ripidistions, but that's not coelacanths. So, like, I don't know what to tell you, man.
The dinosaurs.
Yes, that's right.
And then they find it alive off of Madagascar. Now they find some in Indonesia also. And it's nothing like a transitional fossil.
Yep, but it was never supposed to be. I'm taking another drink. I can't stand this. This thing that no one really ever thought of as transitional isn't transitional. Yeah, okay, Rob.
I would like for somebody to find, like, any primary source document from any period of time where an actual scientist is can't as a transitional fossil. Like, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but, like, I genuinely would like to see that if it does exist.
Yeah, I'm unaware of any such source. I mean, the closest I can come is saying, well, they're lobe-finned fish, which puts them closer to tetrapods than it does to any other fish that aren't lobe-finned fish.
Yeah.
All right, here we go.
Mm-hmm. And it's just like the fossil representation. It hasn't changed.
Nope, that is an absolute lie. There are no members of the genus Latimeria that are found in the fossil record, and even the other members of Latimeridae, which we do find in the Cretaceous, are significantly different. They do not look the same. They are not the same. But yeah, I'm taking a drink for that.
So the entire evolutionary history of whales, coelacanths were right there, and we never find whales and coelacanths buried together.
But they're also not where we would expect modern Latimeria to be found.
Yeah.
Because
you would not
fundamentally,
expect to find where those whale fossils are.
Fundamentally, modern coelacanths and the fossil whales don't live in the same place, because it turns out the ocean isn't one place.
Yeah, I think that's really is what Rob is thinking here, is that, hey, wait a minute, whales live in the ocean, coelacanth live in the ocean, so they're living in the same environment.
Right.
They're living right next to each other.
That's about as silly as saying, hey, this person lives in New York City, and so does this other person, and so they live in the same place. But what you realize is, like, one of them lives in, like, uptown Manhattan, and the other one lives in, like, you know, a hovel in the Bronx. It's like, you're not living in the same place.
I just need to point out here, this is a marine biologist.
Right, he knows the ocean isn't one place.
Right? Like, that needs to be emphasized when he's like, the dumbest things that he's said so far in this video have all been about in an area where he should ostensibly have the most expertise.
Yep. And yet.
And we know they lived at the same time.
Okay, so the same thing would be with humans.
With humans, yeah. Just because we don't find humans buried with dinosaurs does not mean they didn't live at the same time, because the fossil record is fickle.
Okay, but again, the reason with the coelacanths and the whales is because they don't actually have the same habitat unless you're being absurdly broad. But that's not true for humans and dinosaurs. Dinosaurs lived in basically every terrestrial environment you can think of, including snowy tundras in Alaska, right? So we have fossils from all of those places. We have fossils of dinosaurs that probably lived in forests, like Psittacosaurus, which we know probably lived in a forest because we know what its skin markings were like, and its skin markings were countershaded in a way that is ideal for a forested environment. So we have a really good idea that we have dinosaurs.
The main question that I always have about, like, because ecological zonation is brought up a lot as an explanation for like the fossil order that we have. My question is always like, can you point to a single example of a large flood today that has created these stratigraphic layers that are ecologically zonated, like you're saying? Because if floods are capable of doing this, then massive floods like the one in the Channel Scablands should be reproducing these ecologically zonated stratigraphic layers, and they're not.
Right. In fact, what actually tends to happen is that organismal remains that are, swept up in a flood tend to get jumbled with all of the ecological zones from across the entire extent of the flood, all just dumped into one deposit.
Literally exactly what happens. It's like a total mix up. Like, there's no neatly ordered layers according to species type. That's
Right.
what we definitely never ever see in flood deposits.
And it's not like we don't know. Like, we have flood deposits. They're there.
There are real flood geologists who study real actual floods that happen.
Right.
Tell you what those flood deposits look like.
Imagine studying the actual geology of actual floods. What a concept.
What is this idea about fleeing to high ground? Why would fleeing to high ground actually not result in fossils? What's the rationale behind that?
Well, it's really an older argument. And the idea is that because you're smart and you're intelligent, unlike an animal, which is dumb, right? They're just going to die. Humans are going to be like, oh, I'm going to walk uphill.
Yes.
If you're the last thing buried, maybe you wouldn't be petrified as well as the first things buried.
Okay.
I think that's where the argument comes from. But neither you nor I really like this very much because practically it just doesn't work.
I mean, maybe it could work if everyone fled to the top of the mountains. But like we said earlier, humans love to settle near the coast. So, like, it's not clear that even if there were a tsunami, you would have time to even get to a mountain. Never mind climb the mountain. So I'm not disagreeing with Robert Carter here. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
There's another argument people used to use. Some people still do. I'm not a big fan of it. It's called the float and bloat.
What's that?
Well, if when humans die, they float, and therefore they don't get buried in sedimentary rocks.
Okay, yes.
But that's not quite true.
Why is that?
Because human bodies sink. This is why we drown.
But don't we read about people who...
Okay, first of all, that's not why people drown.
I know.
Jeez, I'm taking a drink for that. What? Okay. A living human body, most living humans, are less dense than water overall, and therefore float.
If you're drowned and your lungs are full of water,
then yeah,
you will initially sink. But then once the bacteria, once bacteria start to decompose your body, they'll be releasing gases, and then you will float. And then once your decomposition has gone through after a couple of days or to weeks, depending on your exact composition and fat and all that, then you will sink again. So you float and then sink.
Right. And also, significantly, people don't generally drown because they sink. They mostly drown because they're having trouble keeping just their head above the water for various reasons. So you could be floating, and if your head is not staying above the water often enough, you could be inhaling too much water, and you could then drown.
Yeah, exactly. After a few days, as decompositional gases start building up in the body cavity, the body can float.
Yes.
And it'll float for a while, but then when the gases burst open the abdominal cavity, and they sink again.
Okay, that was a sound effect I didn't really need to hear when talking about bloating corpses. Thanks, Rob. Thanks.
Have you ever heard Rob make a sound like that before?
No, that's a new one for me. I kind of wish I hadn't heard it, but okay.
My main issue with this whole float and bloat thing is that it affects like every animal, not humans. Like, there's nothing that would this is not an explanation for the lack of human fossils specifically, at all. There's nothing. Humans are not preferentially bloating and floating more than any other animal.
Right. And to be fair to Robert Carter, he's also probably going to come up with probably broadly similar reasons as to why this doesn't work.
He won't.
Oh, he won't?
The
Okay.
reasons are just that humans don't bloat. They don't float. That's his answer.
He's broadly correct about that. But yeah, the thing is, if you want to explain why there are no humans, but there are other things, you need to come up with an explanation as to why humans are different from the other things that we do find. So, why do we find like Camarasaurus but not Homo sapiens? What is the difference between Camarasaurus that means that we find multiple specimens of Camarasaurus, but we don't find any specimens of Homo sapiens? Why is that?
Some people use the bloat and float argument as a reason for why we don't find human fossils. But that should apply to all these other animals.
When I'm drinking hard Baja Blasts today. That's an important thing to point out.
As well.
And it should apply to all the other ones also. Unless humans were buried late in the flood and floated and bloated, and other things that floated and bloated early made us sunk, maybe there's a timing differential. But it just sounds like special pleading to me, so I don't go there.
I actually agree with Robert Carter on this one.
Yeah. I mean, this is beautiful. I mean, I just want to bask in this moment for a while because it's so rare that I see young Earth creationists exercising like this level of critical thinking. Like,
Right.
Joel Tay, I'm impressed right here. He was like, this float and bloat hypothesis should not just apply to humans, but every other mammal, every mammal, every animal, right? It's just a special pleading. I'm like, yes, more of this critical thinking. Where has this been for these people's entire careers?
Yeah, apparently, just not. Well, the thing is, okay, it's not fair to say that they don't do critical thinking, because the thing is, they allow themselves to think critically within the very narrow constraints of their particular theology. So they're not willing to think critically about their theology or to question that theology overall, but as long as what they consider the most important parts of their theology are able to remain intact, within that, they are perfectly able to assess different ideas for different amounts of plausibility. And Alex Marcos says, every extinct soaring animal. Am I a joke to you, Mr. Carter? Yeah, we've pointed that out too, is like, none of the fossil sorting mechanisms that young Earth creationists propose work the instant you point out that some animals can fly. Like, that's it. That's all. It's like,
all
hey,
all the way back to the Carboniferous.
right? Like, hey, how come like Meganeura and like Dimorphodon and Quetzalcoatlus, how come they're sorted in different layers? Why is that? Couldn't they all just fly just like all the birds?
Volaticotherium, I think, is that like one that like is kind of like an early it almost like kind of fulfilling the bat niche.
Yeah, wasn't it like a mammaliform or something?
Yeah, it's like not quite a full mammal, but it looks superficially like a bat. I'm like, so how did the bats survive, but those didn't?
Right. Yeah, it never works out for flying creatures.
So what are some better explanations that we have?
Well, how many do we come up with? We came up with like 5 or 6.
Yes, quite a few.
Wait. And I just have to I love that. Joel Tay here is like, so now that we've gone through and we've debunked all of the explanations that other creationists have given that we have shown are logically vacuous, now what are the better explanations? And then Rob just immediately looks down to his notes, like checks notes. How many did we come up with, Joel, at the break room earlier before this video? Like, it's like he doesn't have one to go to. He's just kind of like, what did we come up with, right?
Well, I think part of the problem is I don't think Robert Carter spends time thinking about this problem.
Probably not. I mean, if you're a creationist, you probably it would be painful for you to spend time thinking about this problem.
Yeah.
This would cause cognitive dissonance just to think about.
I like the needles in a haystack argument.
Yes, that's my favorite too. But what's that exactly?
Well, how many humans were alive at the flood?
Well, the Bible says that mankind created them starting with 2, Adam and
2,
Eve.
yeah.
And we know that the flood occurred about 1,600 years later,
Give
plus
or take,
minus
yeah.
a little bit. So we really do not know how many humans were alive at the time of the flood.
No, but the Bible only says that he created 2 humans. It doesn't say anything about any other species, how many organisms God created.
Okay, so assuming by the time of the flood, we have, even if you're going to be generous, 10 million people alive on Earth at the time.
And I doubt it's that much.
Yeah, I doubt so, because the Bible says that, the Earth
Genesis,
was filled with violence.
Yeah, the earth is filled with violence.
Yes.
So, yeah, I don't think there's that many people. Okay.
So is Robert saying that the humans were killing each other so much that it was actually lowering their actual evolutionary fitness as a species?
I think he said, there was too much human on human killing for there to be a population of 10 million. I don't really think that there's much of a correlation there. Like, you can have large scale violence at large populations, Rob.
I don't think there's ever been like a verifiable case in which a population of humans has been demonstrably smaller than it could have been based on carrying capacity as a direct result of them just killing each other en masse. Like, I don't think that's a thing.
I mean, you can't construct a society that's just built on violence and I mean, the way that they have conceived it pre-flood, we know that such a human society would not be feasible at all. So, I mean, God would not even have to send a flood. Like, it would.
Yeah, they wouldn't
The society
persist
would
in
work
that.
itself out if it was truly like that.
Yeah, if it were so violent that it was restricting the population growth, it wouldn't be able to persist.
There's a lot of sedimentary rocks in the world.
Yes.
And you ran the calculation. What was the number that you got? Did you get this out of the Creation Answers book?
Yeah, the Christian Answers book, go check it out. We have some, we have the calculations there. So basically, it's saying that if we assume that we have 10 million people at the time of the flood, and we already say that's generous, if we divide that by 700 million cubic kilometers of sediments, that's only one human for every 70 cubic kilometers.
That's all.
Whoa.
So here's the curious thing, right? If you then want to reverse those numbers and figure out what the total population of all fossil taxa alive were, you run into a problem where, like, that can't possibly be how the sedimentary record works, right? Where we just average out the number of organisms we have, and then we look at the volume that they've been found in, and then we can work backwards to figure out a population, right?
Dapper, they did the volume of the total amount of sedimentary rock in the earth. Like,
yeah. First,
what?
I don't know of anyone who's ever actually done a study on the total volume of sedimentary rock on Earth, because, like, why would you do that? What possible question could you be answering by finding out the total?
This one right here.
Right, exactly. This one particular. So first, yeah, I actually don't know that there's any way to verify those numbers, because I can't imagine how they got those numbers. Because there's never been, as far as I can tell, a real study on that. Because again, why would you? It's like when they say, like, oh, 95% of fossils are marine fossils. Like, first, I agree that the vast majority are marine fossils, but no one's done that study. Like, no one sat and counted up the fossils.
Dapper, even if we were to say, okay, this is the exact perfect number, that is the true volume of total sedimentary layers, their conclusion here, like the math they're doing, is still giving you completely useless values. Like, it doesn't matter what the total number of human skeletons are versus the total amount of volume of sedimentary rock. Like, in nobody's model does that number have any significance at all.
Yeah, it's very bizarre. And, like, yeah, the math would then mean, okay, so Robert Carter, do you really expect me to believe that you think that there were millions upon millions of T-Rexes stomping around the pre-flood Earth? Because, I mean, we have a fair few specimens of Tyrannosaurus Rex. And if we do your same technique, right, where we just take how many we found and we just try to figure out, like, how many that would correspond to, given that we haven't found any of the humans in this many millions of cubic meters or whatever of sedimentary rock, we could very easily get into the billions of T-Rexes.
That was actually the exact argument, like the counter argument that I've used in debates when this point is brought up, against Standing for Truth. He brought up this point to me while we were talking about this subject. And I brought up, like, what about the apex predators, like T-Rex? Because one of my favorite dinosaurs of all time, no offense to the ceratosaurs, but literally I was like, how many T-Rex do you think were alive on Earth before the flood? Do you think it's more than 10 million? Because we have we have several specimens of T-Rex, some of them remarkably complete, and yet not a single human. So for this type of logic to hold, they would have to think that there's more than 10 million T-Rex alive on the globe before the flood, which, by the way, like, I looked up these numbers for any kind of current estimates for the total number of T-Rex populations on Earth at any one given time, and the current estimate that I saw in the paleontological literature was between 20,000 and 50,000 max.
Yeah, I was going to say, I doubt that it would go beyond, like, that, like, level of order of magnitude. Like, if it got to 100,000, I'd be like, that's a lot of T-Rex. I don't think so.
And so we had multiple specimens of T-Rex and not a single human. So, again, that's the major flaw in this that I see, is, like, the species that would have had small populations, such as apex predators, and yet we find all these specimens in the fossil record.
Right. I was going to say, well, humans are an apex predator too, but then I realized that according to Carter, they weren't. Because according to Carter, at least, apparently humans were vegetarians. Although this is something that I get confused, right? Because I've heard creationists say that people weren't eating meat before the fall. Or sorry, before the Noah came off the ark. But I've also heard them say that they were ignoring all of God's rules, which seems like it included don't eat meat. So, like, I guess maybe they work. Like, it doesn't matter.
Right, before we press play on the video, there's one other point that I want to make on this, because this is like, we finally got to the point where Rob has said, here's the idea that I like and I think is the most logical. And it's like one of the least logical of the ones that they've discussed, that none of them were logical. But like,
yeah, it's really not a good one.
It's really, yeah, it's on the same poor quality of as all the other arguments that they've presented earlier. But okay, this is Rob's baby right here. And like, in his own model, right? I don't know if Rob is one of those ecological zonation guys, or if Rob is one of those that, oh, they sorted by density and intelligence and habitat and mobility. Whatever mechanism that Rob thinks that the fossil record is sorted into the order that we find by the flood, whatever mechanism sorts that he thinks, he's not accounting for that at all in this calculation here, because his own model should predict what layers that the humans should be found in based on their density or their habitat or mobility or whatever. They should be able to offer us a prediction, not just say, what about the entire volume of every sedimentary rock layer? They should be able to tell us, well, we know that the flood sorts, carboniferous plants over in the Carboniferous. We know it sorts dinosaurs in the Mesozoic. We know it sorts mammals in the Cenozoic, like all that stuff. They could say, here's how the flood sorts things. So based on that, based on the mechanism we're proposing, here's the layer that our model should predict that the humans should be sorted into. They should be able to do that. And yet...
So, you can make it happen. All right, here we go.
70 cubic kilometers of rock with one human skeleton in it. Needles in a haystack. We simply might never have found the humans that are buried deep in the fossil record.
That's right. And then, I think most of the fossils were not even, most of the people who died would not even become fossils.
That's the second argument.
That's the second
argument. Rarity of fossilization.
Okay, but again, this doesn't work because we have species that were almost certainly rare that we do have fossilized.
Hey, does Rob remember how 2 arguments ago that argument was special pleading? Does he remember that?
No, apparently not. Because the thing is, we're bumping into the problem where he doesn't actually have arguments that, if he does the full critical thinking on, will actually then work for him, which means he has to have this problem, and he doesn't want this problem. He wants it to not be a problem. So he's gonna he's gonna come up with something.
And like, you could just say, okay, yeah, it's so rare that we would have any human fossils before the flood. But that's why we have all these human and hominid fossils post-flood. Like, we do have hominid fossils. It's not like they're so rare that they would never happen.
Yeah.
And like,
and these are the people who tell us that fossils almost never form nowadays anymore. It's like, okay, well then what are all these human fossils?
I love also, yeah, the creationists say that fossils never form, like, they're so rare after the flood, and the flood was like the only way that you could get all these fossils forming. But except for the human fossils, those only formed post-flood, and none of them formed from the flood.
Right. Which is just like, okay, well, then fossilization is actually extremely common post-flood.
None of it makes any sense.
That's the thing. It's common across pseudoscience, where you will come up with, okay, you have a problem. Your model doesn't work for this reason. And there will just be a series of ad hoc explanations that are mutually contradictory, but you just don't think of all of them at once, so you don't have to worry about it. And it happens in, like, anti-vax nonsense. It happens in, like, crystal healing or essential oil woo. It happens in conspiracy theories, like whether or not 9/11 was an inside job, which no, it wasn't. But you get it also in things like flat Earth. You get it in the electric universe. You get it in ancient aliens. You get it in young Earth creationism. The various ad hoc explanations only ever kind of fix one problem, and they break other explanations that are supposed to fix other problems. And the thing is, if you had a real, actual model of how the universe works that was even approaching how the universe works, you wouldn't have this problem, right? Like, physics isn't chock full from beginning to end of post hoc workarounds that actually break the rest of physics if you were to apply them consistently. It's not how physics works. It's not how biology works. It's not how evolutionary biology works. It's a hallmark of pseudoscience and conspiracy theory. So, I'm gonna hit play.
Just because you're dead doesn't mean you're going to fossilize. You have to be
True. I'll take a
buried
drink.
in a rapidly accumulating sedimentary pile.
Mhm.
And even then, you might not fossilize. You can still rot.
Yes. So it's almost impossible to find one.
Then how come we find so many after your fossil-making factory flood? Explain it to me, Robert. That's
like
the
after the
things.
flood conditions, just in normal conditions, that's when we start to find the human fossils.
We've got some on screen periodically. Like, we know they exist.
You don't have a lot of humans, you're probably not going to get a human fossil.
Well, we're
Only
back to
several million.
we're back to the problem of the T-Rexes, Robert. Do you really think that there were more T-Rexes than there were humans? Is that actually your position? The T-Rexes outnumbered humans.
I think he said that 10 million was probably too high, but like I think he at least thinks there were a couple million humans.
Oh yeah,
which
certainly.
is like so many more times larger than the population of T-Rex could have ever been on Earth. Like if he's actually proposing like, oh, everything was really nice before the flood. Maybe there were 10 million T-Rex. I'm like, follow that through. Like, try to figure out what kind of biomass would be required per square kilometer to support a population of 10 million T-Rex on Earth. It doesn't work.
Later in the flood, maybe they died during a time when there wasn't a lot of rock being manufactured. Therefore, their bodies wouldn't be able to be trapped in the rocks.
Okay.
I don't really believe that.
Mhm.
Well, that's good
Depends
because
on
it
where you
doesn't
draw
make
the
any
flood
sense at
post-flood
all.
boundary.
Yes.
30 to 50 is
Was reminded that Rob was prompted to start talking about this because Joel Tay said, so what are the actual good explanations that we do have for the missing human fossils? That was
Good
the
point.
answer. That was what was the prompt. And in response to this, Rob goes off on this. It says at the end of it, no, I actually don't believe anything I just said. It's like, what?
then these were your good ones. Pil
Yeah,
Pong.
like these would not be the good explanations. Like this is just the same, like as the previous ones that they started by debunking them all. Like this is the same kind of explanation that they literally are debunking it, but passing it off as if it's an example of one of the good answers.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people at CMI are leaning toward a high
I'm starting to
high in the Cenozoic. I mean, Tim Clary at ICR is doing some phenomenal work in that and really.
So in case any of you don't know, the last two videos that I uploaded for early access were about Tim Clary talking about the fossil record. It's not what I would call phenomenal work. Yeah, this is the man who thinks that naming the Cretaceous and the Paleogene different things, like giving them different names on account of the different fossils found in them, is circular reasoning. And if you can explain to me what in the world is circular about naming two different things with different properties, with different names, I will give you at least 4 internets, because I can't figure it out. Timothy Clary seems like he might actually be legitimately stupid.
End of the flood because there's this nice break between types of fossils and other types of fossils. Yeah, I don't hold to that anymore.
Yes.
Oh.
But if the flood is in the late Cenozoic,
What explains the break in the fossils then, Rob?
I think that he's saying that that's the work that he thinks Cleary is doing. That
He's explaining why
good work is that he's saying that the flood boundary was not in the KT boundary, that it was above that, and that's what Rob I think is what Rob is saying is the good work that he's done, and that has actually convinced Rob that the KT boundary is not the flood boundary.
Okay. But I would be curious then to know what explains the iridium layer and the almost instantaneous turnover in faunal assemblages right at that layer.
there's a massive amount of rocks being formed in the Cenozoic in the flood.
Okay.
So I can't.
Isn't that where you should be finding the humans, according to you? Because, like, they live in upland areas or something? Like, whatever.
Can't go with the maybe humans died later when there's less rock formation. No, still lots of rock formation in the end stages.
Okay. So even if humans did,
He just debunked his whole point right there, right?
Yeah, so far the only thing that Robert Carter has not bothered to debunk is just there's a lot of total volume of sedimentary rocks, which is a dumb argument for 2 different reasons. The big one being that, that would imply that there are just millions and millions of species that should not be outnumbering humans in any kind of ecology. And then also, it ignores the fact that it's special pleading because we have explanations as to why certain fossils wind up in certain places. And no creationist thinks that all fossils should be like equiprobably distributed across the entire sedimentary volume of rock. That's not what they think. Because it's obviously not true, so they have to account for that. So why doesn't that apply to humans? Why do we suddenly get to use the entire volume of sedimentary rocks? All right, here we go.
Run to higher ground and they're rapidly buried in those higher layers. We wouldn't expect to find the fossils because what happens when the flood subsides?
The last things that are laid down are the first things to be eroded.
So that means the top layers.
Top
will be
layers
eroded away.
get.
Remember, this would mean that we would have more abundant strata from sedimentary rocks the lower we go in the stratigraphic column. But that's the opposite of what happens. By far, the most common sedimentary rocks are like early Holocene.
Yeah, and again, we still do have human fossils in the Cenozoic rocks. I mean, and here's the real rub, though, is like they're only focusing on human skeletons, but there are many, many other signs of human civilization that are not just fossils. Like, you have all of our technology, they're not finding any tools in any of these layers either. You have, like, in actual environments where humans coexisted with large animals, you can often find signs of humans hunting those animals. Like, you actually find, like, on their bones, you will find markings from human tools. Guess what we never find on Mesozoic fossils? Tool marks, tools, any signs of civilization, any archaeological remains from any kind of building or technology or anything that would be a hallmark of humans. Like, the humans, you're saying, oh, well, they were the last to die because they were intelligent and they just, like, went to high ground and avoided the floodwaters or whatever. It's like, are they bringing all of their stuff with them?
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
I heard a very interesting talk at the last International Conference of Creationism.
Yes.
And the speaker was saying some controversial things that made some people a little uncomfortable.
I'm just going to say, the phrase, I heard a very interesting talk at the last International Conference on Creationism, is a sentence that I don't know that anyone could ever say that honestly, but you know what? Whatever.
Wait. I love the entire sentence. You got to finish that. And the speaker was saying some things that were making us pretty uncomfortable.
Well, yeah, okay. That I'll believe. I will believe that. Because it's actually pretty easy to make creationists feel uncomfortable.
Do you have any guess as to which speaker he'd be talking about just based on the information he's given so far? Like, who's giving a talk at CMI that's making everybody in the audience uncomfortable?
Todd Wood, maybe Kurt Wise, maybe Marcus Ross.
Let's see if he says who it is.
Yeah.
But one of the things he said was, what flood post-flood boundary? It's been eroded.
The one where you have flood rocks below it consistently, and then above it you have post-flood rocks. That's it. That's which one.
Eroded.
It's been eroded, he said.
To explain that, I mean, I understand that, but for our viewers,
After the flood is over, rocks are not deposited anymore. The water subsides. And
take a drink for no rocks are deposited after the flood.
Okay, no more rocks, guys. No more rocks.
First thing that happens is massive amounts of erosion happen to the entire Earth's surface that's exposed to the atmosphere.
Yes.
And so whatever is deposited last is being heavily eroded.
So you're actually saying that the flood boundary
doesn't really exist.
Doesn't really exist. So what we have is,
even if that were true, it still wouldn't make sense. There would still be a flood boundary.
Early flood and post flood. But not so much the late flood.
What about the middle flood?
What? So wait a minute. Okay, wait. Okay, I think I misunderstood this. So they're saying that only the late flood layers, the post flood layers are still existing, I guess, and only the late flood all eroded, and then all we have is the early flood layers.
I guess. Although that erosion doesn't mean it disappears. That means that it went somewhere. Where is it? Is it at the bottom of the ocean? I don't know.
Yeah. A lot of late flood stuff will be destroyed.
Dapper, I know where it is. It's in the same place as all the 10 million human fossils.
Obviously.
Interesting. Okay.
But see, there's also an ecological component to the flood.
Oh, here we go. Ecological zonation.
The first thing buried are marine organisms.
Okay.
The next thing buried are like swampy edge of the continents organisms. Then you have organisms from higher ground.
Uh-huh.
So there's an
Okay, we'll take a drink. We're going to talk about ecological zonation, even though we already have talked about it. Okay, so first of all, okay, go ahead.
Okay, never mind.
No, okay. So first of all, we don't stop finding marine organisms, which is a little bit of a problem, right?
Exactly.
And-
And we don't wait. We don't stop finding marine organisms or coastline or swamp dwellers. Like
True,
they're
yeah.
in the layers.
Yeah, that's one of the things. Is like we don't go from marine to coastline and swamp to creatures from the mainland. We go from marine to marine and coastline and swamp dwellers to marine and coastline and swamp dwellers and mainland, and so on. And also, like we said earlier, the ordering of the marine fossils doesn't even go from deep to shallow, like this whole idea presents, right? Because the basic idea is supposed to be that you're preserving organisms more or less in order of like elevation, right? So the higher elevation they are, the later in the rocks that they're going to be buried. But like, it's just not true.
I just wish that somebody would ask Rob, do you acknowledge the existence of marine organisms in every single layer of rock? like as in like it's in the Cretaceous, it's in the Jurassic, it's in the Cenozoic. You're gonna find marine organisms in all of those layers, every one.
Mhm.
Like, will he acknowledge that? Do you
No.
think if asked directly?
Oh, if asked directly? Oh, yeah, I don't know, maybe.
Because like it feels like if he does acknowledge that, then he would have to acknowledge that this whole ecological order thing is bullshit.
and it's successive and it's in order. And
Flood
if
bank.
humans are buried here, that's the part that's getting erased first.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
Another thing that might have destroyed human fossils is subduction.
What's that?
Well, it's continental drift. Plates.
You don't just start with continents drift. Okay, he's talking about now. I can see his hands do. All right, fine. You know what? He's just not doing it. It's the way I would. So okay, whatever. It's fine, Rob.
Diving under other plates. If humans are buried in a place where there's subduction zone, maybe the human fossils have been melted by now.
I mean, look, there are definitely fossils that have been destroyed by subduction. So you know what? Because I'm thirsty and feeling generous, and it's late in the show, I take a drink for Rob technically getting something right.
I'm not even gonna take a drink for that one, Dapper. That he's just literally spitballing. He's like, maybe some glaciers came by, scraped off the layers. Maybe they subducted. Maybe a meteorite
Are you
came
telling
and
me-
blew away the layer.
Are you telling me you don't think any fossils have been destroyed by subduction?
No, he's literally just spitballing anything that could
Okay,
destroy.
but counterpoint, I'm thirsty.
Okay, that valid. Take a drink.
It's interesting.
I mean,
I just
Catastrophic
cannot give
plate
credit.
tectonics is-
I cannot give Rob credit for this.
All right.
It's an idea that I think all of us at CMI hold to, at least mostly.
And so what's that? So a catastrophic plate tectonics, CPT, is referring to massive movement of plates during the flood.
During the flood. In fact, the flood was probably propelled by plate movement.
Hey, here's a fun thing. You can do some back of the envelope calculations to figure out roughly how much heat was released by all the continents moving at the speeds that would have been needed for them to get from roughly Pangea to their current location. Because Pangea, or sometimes Rodinia, is what creationists usually propose as the pre-flood world. And you don't even have to include the radiometric decay heat, just the heat from the continents doing the traveling, and I'm being very generous with this when I did the math myself, is enough to boil the oceans at least twice over, just on their own, just the continents moving. Because it turns out, you can't just move things for free. And also, I want to point out that John Baumgartner is the guy who came up with this model, right?
Yep.
And he used his modeling program, Terra. But did you know that he had to increase the thermal diffusivity of the rocks of Earth by like 2 orders of magnitude to even make it physically possible for the continental plates to move this quickly?
The great thing about Baumgartner is that he fully admits that his model requires supernatural, miraculous intervention by God to dissipate all the heat. He fully admits this. He has no problem saying, yeah, my model requires miracles. But then, like, all of the creationists downstream from him are trying to use his model and trying to say that there's not a heat problem at the same time.
And plates moving not at the rate your fingernails grow, but about as fast as you could walk or you can run.
Yes.
So catastrophic.
Which again is physically impossible unless you just change the physical parameters of Earth, right? Baumgartner's model can't work unless you increase the thermal diffusivity of the Earth's rocks, which isn't something you can just kind of do. That's in itself a miracle. So this isn't a model. This is just some kind of idea for a fantasy novel where a wizard did it.
So we have multiple explanations for why we do not find human fossils.
Dude, you got to 2 that you accept and didn't debunk yourselves.
Hey, 2 is technically multiple. You have to drink for being technically correct on that one.
All right, fine. Take a drink. Ugh. All right.
Today.
Multiple.
Okay.
And we know the fossil record is fickle.
Hmm.
We know that things that live together are not buried together because they're alive now. And we don't find them together in the fossil record. So just because we don't find humans buried with dinosaurs, just because we don't find lots of humans deep in the fossil record, that doesn't actually mean anything.
What is he talking? Like, what specifically is he talking about?
He's now just saying now the missing human fossils just don't mean anything. They just don't mean anything, guys.
Okay, well, here's the thing, right? Like, I don't think on its own that the missing human fossils is enough to just, like, by itself say, okay, the flood model is out, right? I think we have more than enough that are, defeaters on their own. This is not, like, my favorite version of, like, why the flood couldn't have happened. But, like, it means something, right? Like, your models do predict that we should find humans somewhere. Why don't we? The fact that we don't is a problem, but I do consider it to be a relatively minor one compared to things like, the heat problem, or the fact that most of the supposed flood rocks just don't show any physical evidence of having been deposited by a flood, and in some cases.
The earliest human fossils don't look like you and me necessarily.
So if I do find a human fossil that is from before the flood, will I assume that that's an early post-flood fossil?
You probably assume that it's an early human offshoot of chimpanzees or something like that. I don't know what the...
No, you wouldn't. He's a creationist. Why would he assume that?
Yeah, wait, what?
What's...
What?
So is he... Okay, so maybe he's not trying to say that like, Joel is going to assume that, but maybe he means that, like, when we found, like, Sahelanthropus chilensis, that was supposed to be a chimpanzee offshoot, and that's why it looks so basal. And that's been mistaken?
He's saying that if we found pre-flood humans, we might think that they were some chimpanzee offshoot in human evolution or something.
I mean, that seems like he's agreeing with a whole lot of human evolution that he normally wouldn't agree with.
So in this instance, Sahelanthropus would actually be like a pre-flood human. Like what?
So maybe we have found pre-flood humans and they're just like Sahelanthropus or like Ardipithecus, and those are actually humans and not apes, according to him?
Like, we're getting closer and closer to, like, just human evolution.
Right. Like, look, dude, if you're going to accept that, like, things that are so basal that people would mistake them for chimpanzees are actually humans, what argument do you have left against human evolution, right? Like, I can't even parse that. I'm taking a drink. Wow. Well, here we go. Let me find my mouse and hit play, because I couldn't see where my mouse was.
Part of the fossil record, it was reworked.
Uh-huh.
It was eroded from somewhere else and deposited in this layer.
Now, that is a thing that does happen, and that creationists like to ignore. Like, I've heard more than one creationist complain about the fact that at Olduvai Gorge, there was a, like, anatomically modern Homo sapiens found, and then they just ignore the fact that it was very obviously reworked, because the sediment it's buried in is a collection of just scattered bits of the higher strata, meaning that it was a hole that was dug into the strata where the Olduvai Gorge Homo habilis were found, and then the body was deposited in the hole, meaning it was buried. They just like to ignore that, and they were like, well, they found a modern human at Olduvai Gorge. Not really.
Or it was a burial. Someone dug a hole and put a human in it and then filled it in again, and therefore that's why it looks like it's buried in this rock layer, but it's really not. The human died out millions of years after this rock layer was laid down.
Yeah, but Rob, we can check for that. We can look at the sediment.
Well, Dapper, burying human remains, famously an activity that humans do not do.
Well, but it's just like that. That's the thing. Like, we know how to tell if something's been reworked. It's not like it's actually all that difficult to determine, right? Is the strata at that location consistent with the local area that seems undisturbed? Or does it have a whole bunch of stuff that's been mixed in from higher layers? If it has a whole bunch of stuff mixed in from higher layers, well, that's what a hole that was dug and then filled in looks like. Is that what this looks like? If yes, then yeah, it was reworked. What is he? Does he think that we don't have a good way to tell if something was reworked?
I honestly think he probably hasn't given it much thought.
Yeah,
he,
okay,
he
yeah.
probably hasn't looked at what actually makes scientists and geologists determine if something's been reworked. And he probably is just saying, "Oh wow, it just sounds like such an ad hoc explanation." You know, he's not actually looking at what evidence would suggest that that was
Yeah.
the case.
All right, so here's one thing. We have less than 2 minutes of this left. We're going to go over in an effort to get it done.
I'm strapping in.
All right.
So not just what you're saying is that the evolutionary mindset will actually cause them to reinterpret this so that it's placed at a much later date.
Yeah, and you can also redate the entire rock layer. Oh, we thought this rock layer was older, but it's actually much younger than we thought. There's
Not on the basis of what fossil you find in there. Like, I'm going to take a drink. Fossil-bearing layers are occasionally reassessed, but that's because what happens is that we actually get better absolute dating for that area that were before just known stratigraphically. Or sometimes, like what recently happened with the KPG boundary, we get more accurate results, which allow us to round to a near million, like the nearest million number. That's a little bit different, right? Like that's why the KPG went from 65 to 66 million years. Because the older estimates had bigger margins of error, but the whole number that you round to was 65. We've recently had better... Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I just want to know, like, you did give an example right there, but like, that was just changing it a little bit. Like,
yeah, it wasn't even
plus or
technically
minus
changing.
a million here or there. Like, what Rob was just describing sounds like you're finding like something like the Cretaceous layer, and then you find a rabbit in it, and you're like, oh. Well, actually, we were wrong. The Cretaceous layer was actually laid down 20 million years ago, or something. Like,
yeah,
and I'm not aware of a single instance of anything like that ever happening.
No,
I don't know if you are, but
to my knowledge, it hasn't happened. The thing is that like you don't just willy-nilly redate layers because of fossils that you find in them. Most layers at this point have been carefully stratigraphically dated. Well, actually, they've been carefully dated both stratigraphically as well as absolutely, by using different volcanic rocks that are associated.
Like bracketing the igneous layers.
Exactly.
So at the end of the day, I guess we have already shown many reasons for why we don't really find pre-flood human fossils.
No, you showed like maybe 2, and they both didn't make sense. But okay.
Yeah.
many.
Well, wait. Oh. They did show many reasons. It's just that they also debunked like 98% of the ones that they showed.
Right,
and
exactly.
then the 2 that they didn't debunk, we debunked. So
yeah.
Potential
they
reasons.
showed many explanations, just none of them good.
Fair.
Potential reasons. Okay.
We didn't actually answer conclusively because it can't be answered conclusively.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the nature of history and the nature of the historical sciences. No one was there to see it.
I mean, okay, I agree that conclusive is probably too high a standard, but you should have some plausible mechanism, and you don't.
Except you can say certain things conclusively about history, like the Pompeii eruption, like Mount Vesuvius eruption affecting Pompeii. Like,
yeah, that's pretty conclusive.
We're pretty concrete about that. Like,
yeah,
you can be certain when the archaeological evidence is like very concrete. Like, we know that Pompeii was buried in the eruption by Mount Vesuvius. Like, that's concrete. That's known because the evidence firmly establishes it. And you can do this for historical events.
All right, well,
it wasn't like we had scientists recording on a notepad, all this processes happening. That's not true.
Once again, the fetishization of eyewitness testimony.
Yeah, it's not true, nor is it sufficient or necessary to establish any historical fact.
And so we're left with a giant void called history that we're trying to fill in with.
Wait, I thought you told me that the Bible was your book of history, Robert Carter. Are you telling me the Bible isn't good enough to tell you how to solve all these problems?
No. Rob Carter is saying that he's filling his void with the Bible.
Oh, he's got a Bible-shaped hole in his heart?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's interpretive ideas. And that's what this is, an interpretive idea of history that can possibly explain this question. But the question is not really that big a deal. And there's no reason for a skeptic to jump.
Okay. Like I said, I actually kind of agree that it's not the biggest deal, and there's a reason why, like, when I talk about reasons I don't accept the flood, that, like, missing human fossils are pretty much never on the list, right? Like, there's so many stronger reasons to reject the flood that this is kind of minor compared to them, but on its own, it's a reason to question, right? Like, the fact that we don't have any of these flood human fossils, even though we really should, it makes you wonder. Now, again, like I said, I don't think it's the best one, but
I might disagree a little bit on here, but like that's just because I wouldn't say like in terms of like objectively what are the strongest arguments against it, but in terms of my favorite arguments that I love using against creationists, this is one of my favorites.
that's fair.
Because the entire purpose of the flood was to kill all of humanity except for Noah's family. So it's a murder mystery. And we don't have a single body. Like, that's the one thing that the flood was supposed to do, was create a bunch of human bodies. That's the one thing. It's one job. And we don't have any evidence of it. It's like, to me, it is kind of a big deal. And it is like, if the flood was true, like the one thing it was supposed to do, we have no evidence of. So to me, I do like bringing it up. And I like bringing it up too, because a lot of the times the creationists do not think about this question, and it catches them off guard, and they have no answer for it.
I never thought about that.
Jump on us saying, "Hey, you think that that humans live with dinosaurs? How come you don't find any humans buried with dinosaurs? Ha ha ha!" And I'm like, "Yeah, whatever."
Yeah, and I think the needle in a haystack argument.
I mean, okay, if someone's going to come at you like that, then yeah, I guess you can dismiss them. But, like, you should actually have a reasonable answer for that question.
I mean, he's talking about it as if, like, this is, like, a very common question that he is confronted by, like, all the time. And now, after all this, after an hour, he just did his little workshop for how this interaction would go, and the answer he provides is, yeah, whatever.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's
all he's got.
That's where basically we're ending this. We do have a little bit more, but that does seem like it's going to be his final words. Like, who cares? Like, I mean, you care enough to do this whole thing.
His argument is just, yeah, whatever.
If you want to have a CMI speaker come to your church or your organization, just contact us and we'll send someone out and come to you to answer some more questions.
What do you think the chances are that they would actually agree to come on the channel?
Like, can we do that?
Yeah, I don't know.
I want to send a random CMI representative somewhere.
I mean, I want to send them just to my channel for like a chat. So if you're not currently subscribed to Grayson's channel, after this one, you go click on that and check it out. And if it's something that you like, go subscribe over there.